For thousands of years, gold was more than just a metal. It was power, it was trust, it was money. Every empire that rose and fell under the sun, Rome, Egypt, the British Empire, was built upon it. From the shimmering temples of pharaohs to the crowns of kings, gold represented stability, divine favor, and control. But what if I told you that somewhere along the way, this eternal symbol of wealth quietly lost its throne, and the world didn't even notice? This is the story of how gold, once the backbone of civilization's economy, became just another commodity. This is the fall of real money, the age of real value. Let's go back in time, far before credit cards, digital banking, or even paper bills. In the ancient world, people traded through barter. A farmer exchanged grain for cloth, a hunter swapped meat for tools. But barter had its limits. What if the tailor didn't need grain? What if the hunter didn't want cloth? Society needed a universal medium of exchange, something rare, durable, and trusted by all. And that's when humanity discovered gold. Unlike anything else, gold was timeless. It didn't rust, fade, or rot. You could melt it, reshape it, divide it, or store it for centuries, and it would still shine. The Egyptians called it the flesh of the gods. For the Romans, gold was the heart of empire. Julius Caesar once said, "Gold is the sinews of war," meaning that real power didn't come from swords, but from the gold that forged them. From Asia to Europe, gold became the measure of value. Kingdoms minted coins stamped with royal faces, and trust in gold meant trust in the ruler himself. When you held a gold coin, you held a piece of certainty, a guarantee backed by something you could touch, feel, and weigh. The birth of paper promises. But as trade expanded and empires grew, carrying large amounts of gold became risky and heavy. Merchants began leaving their gold with trusted goldsmiths who issued paper receipts as proof of deposit. These receipts could be traded instead of the gold itself, and everyone knew they could be exchanged back for the real metal any time. It was a brilliant innovation. Money had become portable. These pieces of paper became known as banknotes. And as long as every note was backed by actual gold in the vault, people trusted them completely. But humans are clever, and sometimes dangerously so. Goldsmiths and early bankers realized that not everyone came back to redeem their gold at once. Most people were content to trade the paper receipts. So they began issuing more paper notes than the gold they actually held. It was the first quiet betrayal of gold, the beginning of fractional reserve banking. The illusion worked for a while. The empire of gold and paper. By the 19th century, this system evolved into what was known as the gold standard. Under this system, every national currency was tied to a fixed amount of gold. A British pound, an American dollar, a French franc, all had real metal value behind them. It kept governments honest. They couldn't simply print more money unless they had the gold to back it. This golden age of finance fueled global trade, exploration, and industrial revolution. The world was connected by rails of trust and gold. But as the 20th century approached, cracks began to appear. Nations fought costly wars, economies demanded more spending than their gold reserves allowed. Governments realized something uncomfortable. Gold was a chain. The wars that broke the standard. World War I was the first major blow. European powers drained their gold reserves to fund the war machine. To keep up, they printed more paper money than they could redeem. Inflation skyrocketed, prices exploded. And after the war, countries discovered they couldn't return to the old system without facing massive economic pain. Then came the Great Depression. In the 1930s, banks collapsed, currencies fell, and trust in money evaporated. People rushed to exchange their paper dollars for real gold. The US government, terrified of losing its reserves, responded in a shocking way. In 1933, President Franklin D. Roosevelt issued Executive Order 6102, making it illegal for Americans to own gold. Citizens were forced to hand over their gold coins and bars to the Federal Reserve, receiving paper dollars in exchange. For the first time in history, the link between the people and gold was forcibly severed. The government now controlled the gold and the paper. Gold was no longer real money. It was now a state secret. Bretton Woods. The last deal. After World War II, the world needed a new system to rebuild shattered economies. In 1944, leaders gathered in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, and made a historic decision. The US dollar would become the world's reserve currency, backed by gold. Other currencies would be tied to the dollar, and the dollar itself would be convertible to gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. The system promised stability, but it rested on one fragile assumption, that the US would never print more dollars than its gold reserves could cover. For a while it worked beautifully. The US became the economic engine of the world, but behind closed doors, something dangerous was happening. The United States began spending far beyond its means, on the Cold War, on Vietnam, on ambitious social programs. Dollars flooded the world, far more than gold could justify. Foreign governments grew suspicious. They began demanding gold in exchange for their dollars. And then one day, America blinked. 1971. The day gold died on August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon went on national television and made an announcement that would change the world forever. He said the US would temporarily suspend the dollar's convertibility into gold.
Sounded harmless, temporary.
But it was, in truth, the death of the gold standard. From that moment on, the US dollar and every major currency tied to it was backed by nothing.
No gold, no silver.
Just faith. Faith that governments would keep their word.
Faith that paper had value.
Faith that the system wouldn't collapse. It was a new kind of money, fiat currency, money by government decree. Gold was no longer the master. It had become just another traded asset, valuable but no longer powerful. The illusion of wealth. At first, the world didn't feel much different. People still used dollars, bought goods, and trusted banks. But under the surface, something had fundamentally changed. Without gold's restraint, governments were free to print as much money as they wished. Debt became limitless. Inflation turned from a warning sign into an accepted norm. In the decades that followed, the world entered an era of financial illusion. Stock markets soared, housing boomed. Digital money emerged, but all of it was built on paper promises. Promises created out of thin air by central banks. Meanwhile, gold watched silently from the sidelines, no longer the measure of value, but a reminder of what once was. When crises struck, like the 2008 financial collapse or the pandemic of 2020, governments printed trillions of dollars overnight to keep the system alive. It worked, at least temporarily, but the question lingered. How long can you print wealth before it stops being real? Look at the return of the forgotten. Metal. Ironically, even after being dethroned, gold has never truly disappeared. When economies shake, when currencies fall, when people lose faith, gold quietly rises. It's as if the world still remembers, deep down, that real value cannot be printed. In 2023, central banks around the world bought record amounts of gold. Nations like China, Russia, and India began reducing their dependence on the US dollar, hoarding gold as a hedge against uncertainty. The message was clear. The world's faith in paper money was fading. And while modern investors chased digital assets, cryptocurrencies, and speculative gains, gold remains the one constant. It doesn't promise interest. It doesn't pay dividends.
But it endures. It always has.
Because gold, unlike paper, has no master. The lesson of the fall. So what can we learn from gold's fall from power? First, that value is a story, a shared belief. When enough people believe that a piece of paper has worth, it does. When they stop believing, it doesn't. Second, that no system lasts forever. Every monetary empire, like every political one, eventually reaches a point where it consumes itself in greed, debt, and excess. And finally, that real money was never truly lost. It simply went into hiding, waiting for the world to remember. The fall of gold wasn't just the end of an economic era. It was the beginning of a grand experiment, an experiment in trust, manipulation, and illusion. And like all experiments, it will one day face its result. When that day comes, when the world's faith in fiat currency finally breaks, humanity might once again turn to the one thing that never lies, the weight of gold in your hand. The story of gold is the story of us, our ambition, our greed, and our endless search for something real. We built civilizations on its shine. We started wars to possess it. And when we replaced it with paper, we thought we had become gods, creators of value, masters of the economy. But deep down we know the truth. Paper burns, empires fall, systems collapse, yet gold remains. And perhaps, in the ashes of the next great collapse, when the illusion fades and the numbers on screens turn meaningless, we'll once again hear the echo of an ancient truth whispered across the ages. In the end, real money always returns.